specifically the four main areas I just cited. The other layers will come gradually. That is why we have launched several initiatives.
In the cool hours before dawn, a private jet cut silently through the skies over West Africa, its sleek silhouette hidden against a fading night. Inside, Eric Trump sat by the window, staring out at the distant horizon as the first faint glow of morning began to stretch across the earth. The cabin was quiet except for the steady hum of the engines. He had chosen this time of arrival deliberately. No crowds, no cameras, no one to notice. Burkina Faso was not the kind of place his family's name usually appeared in connection with. There were no luxury resorts here, no gilded hotels bearing their brand. And that was exactly why he had chosen it. In recent months, whispers had reached him, whispers of opportunities that were far from the eyes of the world. Opportunities that required discretion, patience, and above all, secrecy. The landing was smooth, almost ghostly, at a modest airstrip outside the capital. The tarmac lights flickered briefly as the plane taxied to a halt. Waiting at the edge of the runway was a single black SUV, its windows tinted dark enough to swallow the weak morning light. A man in a simple jacket stepped forward as Eric descended the stairs, his expression unreadable but his handshake firm. No one spoke as the car rolled into motion, the dry wind carrying faint traces of dust across the empty roads. Eric glanced at the buildings they passed. A mix of concrete blocks and corrugated roofs, streets slowly stirring with the life of a new day. This was not New York, not Washington, not Paris. But there was something about the rawness of it that appealed to him. It felt unclaimed. For the next several hours, the convoy wove its way out of the city, past fields where early workers bent over the soil, past villages where children waved absently as they passed. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist, and the land stretched wide and open, dotted with trees that looked as though they had been standing for centuries. By midday, they reached a secluded compound surrounded by high earthen walls. Inside, a cluster of low buildings provided shelter from the harsh light. A table had been set up under a canopy, where a small group of men waited. They greeted Eric with nods rather than words, and soon papers were spread before him. Maps, figures, diagrams drawn hastily in the dust. It was not about gold, at least not directly, nor was it about politics, though politics hovered over every conversation like a shadow. It was something quieter, a network forming beneath the surface, tying together threads of trade, influence, and possibility. Eric listened more than he spoke, his mind working behind an impassive mask. He asked questions when needed, took notes on a small leather-bound pad, and made no promises. The nights in Burkina Faso were different. They fell quickly, almost without warning, and the stars seemed to burst into existence all at once. That night, Eric stood on the balcony of the small guest house within the compound, a glass of water in his hand. The distant hum of generators was the only sound. Somewhere beyond the walls, drums were faintly beating, a rhythm carried on the wind. He wondered how many people even knew he was here. Perhaps none, save a handful around the table. Over the next days, his movements were kept deliberately irregular. At dawn, he would ride out with 2 escorts, visiting sites far from the main roads, stretches of land marked only by stones, warehouses that seemed abandoned but were not, a disused airfield whose cracked pavement told stories of another era. Every place held a fragment of the picture he was assembling. In one village, elders welcomed him into a shaded courtyard, their weathered hands gesturing as they spoke in low voices. An interpreter translated only what was necessary. There were promises of partnership, but not the kind written in contracts. Rather, they were the kind that lived in handshakes and memory. In another settlement, a group of young men showed him crates stacked high in a makeshift storage room. He did not ask too many questions about what lay within. Each night, reports were sent, not through official channels, but through encrypted messages, bouncing between continents before landing where they were meant to. His family did not know the details. That was the point. This was his mission, his gamble, and his silence was part of its strength. But secrecy is a heavy cloak, and it grows heavy with time. On the 5th day, as he sat in a dimly lit room with 2 local advisors, a knock came at the door. One of his guards stepped in, his face tense. There were rumors, he said. A journalist had been seen asking questions at the airport. Someone had noticed the unusual flight. Eric considered this in silence. He was not unused to attention. His entire life had been a performance, whether he liked it or not. But here, attention was a liability. Plans were hastily shifted. The convoy would change routes. The meetings would be shortened, and the departure moved earlier by 2 days. That night, the compound was restless. Vehicles were checked, bags were packed, calls were made in hushed tones. Outside, the wind carried dust through the courtyard, swirling it into the corners. Eric walked alone along the perimeter wall, his mind turning over what had been done and what remained unfinished. There were risks still, but also momentum. Sometimes, leaving before the final handshake was the only way to keep the door open. The journey back to the airstrip was made in near silence. The driver kept his eyes on the road. The guard scanned the horizon. In the distance, the first hints of rain flickered on the edge of the sky, a rare blessing in that season. As the plane came into view, Eric allowed himself a final glance at the land that stretched endlessly behind them. Burkina Faso was not a place that gave up its secrets easily, but he had taken something from it. A set of coordinates, a promise, a thread in a much larger weave. When the jet lifted off, the world below slipped back into its rhythm. Markets opened, children went to school, roads filled with a hum of daily life. His name would not appear in the newspapers. No cameras had clicked, no microphones had caught his voice. It was as though he had never been there at all. Yet in the days and weeks that followed, small changes began to ripple quietly. A shipment moved through an unexpected port. A contract was renegotiated. A name, once unfamiliar in a certain ministry, now carried a quiet weight. In a world built on appearances, the unseen currents were often the strongest. Eric returned to his usual life, the familiar circuits of business meetings and polished events. But every now and then, late at night, he would glance at a particular folder in his encrypted files. It contained maps, notes, photographs, all from those few days beneath the Burkinabe sun. There was more to be done, but only when the time was right. And so, the story remained unwritten in the public record, living instead in whispers, in the margins of reports, in the memory of those who had shaken his hand in the dust and said nothing more.